Hello, welcome to episode 105 of the Carrier's Edge podcast. Final episode of the season. I'm Mark Morrell. How do I introduce myself? President of Carrier's Edge and joined by our illustrious CEO,
Jane Jazarawi, also of Carrier's Edge.
Yes, also known around these parts from time to time. And we have got lots of summer stuff on our mind, but we also have some work things to talk about. And I think this being the last episode of the season, we will kind of do a little bit of a wrap up and talk about some things that are happening over the summer maybe. And I will hint and tease that there might be some things different about this podcast in the fall.
Yes, we will leave that at that. I think we should start with the weather. Apparently most of the planet is engulfed in this huge heat wave.
Most of the Northeast has had a huge heat wave, although apparently it broke because the people that were in Eastern time today told me that it's not hot anymore. They got some heavy rain and it's cooled off and it's nicer now.
Well, I was just thinking it's weird because on the island it's freezing.
Oh, it's sunny and warm. It's just a cold wind.
Yeah, and it's probably just down here by the water.
Yes, so very different.
But I'm wearing a sweater and it's not air conditioned.
Yeah, and we are not going for ice cream after, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's actually kind of cold down here too.
Yeah, well, I keep it cool so that we don't sweat so much when we're down here working out and things.
Oh, if you hear my teeth start chattering, that's why.
Well, that's what Martha's job is, to cut out all of the teeth chattering. Yes, in the edits. So on the work front, I wanted to start with a very interesting topic that you were discussing on the radio a week or two ago.
On Education Station.
On Education Station. And this was the subject of, was communication, which is like, kill me now, another talk about communication. But you had an interesting perspective that you and Jimmy, I guess, were talking about, which is how do you teach communication or teach listening or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, teaching communication is not a one and done. Like you don't have an hour long, here's how you communicate. And I think, I mean, people ask us for courses in this and you can kind of skim the surface. But for every single piece of communication, you're looking at a much deeper dive if you want to really become an expert in it. I mean, there's tons and tons of bits and pieces around education and around communication and the style of communication that you have, your nonverbal, your verbal communication, how you talk to people, how you listen to people, the difference between passive and active listening. Like there's just so much. But what we were talking about, what I do is I listen to all the Education Station shows that have gone like previously in the month. And then I talked to Jimmy Mack of the, not the Drew Barry show, the Dave Nemo show. In my head, I had Drew Barry and I was like, no, it's not Drew Barry anymore. It's Dave Nemo. Very different people.
Yes.
But anyway, so we were talking about it because I had listened to one of his shows where he had a couple of recruiters from Melton Truck Lines, a trucking company in the United States, and they were talking about the importance of listening skills, the importance of listening to drivers, and how important that is. And he said, so how do you teach that? And that was like a big...
How do you teach learning, or how do you teach listening?
How do you teach people to listen really well? And it was kind of a big... It was a...
Was a question they weren't expecting?
They weren't expecting the question, and they don't know how they teach it. They recognize good listening skills. They can identify good listening skills, but I don't know that people really know how to say, okay, your listening skills are poor, but here's how you're going to improve them. And it's kind of you just do it. And that's one of the things that people do this when they're really good at stuff. Oh, and where you want to say, oh, you just do it.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, just do it. Be more social. Just do it.
Yeah.
Just get out there. And, you're talking to someone with poor social skills and they don't know what to do. They're not necessarily shy, but shyness can be part of it. But there can be other obstacles to having good social skills and listening skills. Same thing. Just listen better. Listen.
Right.
And you hear this in school all the time, listen, you got to listen. And what does that look like? And what does it mean?
Yeah. What are you listening for? What are the steps? What are the specific things that I should be thinking about as I'm listening?
Exactly.
Yeah, and people don't know what that is. And a lot of people that are educators aren't really sure how to itemize it because they're people, like you say, that are naturally good at it. Yeah, those are the worst educators, people that are naturally good at something.
But educators generally are good communicators.
Yeah, they have to. Well, good educators are good communicators. A lot of times the educators are the people that were the best practitioners in the discipline, and they're not really good at listening. They just naturally know how to do it well. And somebody has said, oh, now teach other people to do what you do. And they are lost.
So there's a bunch of things to listening that are interesting. One of the things, and we had our eldest had communication issues when he was very little. And so we went to like a communication the series of workshops. Do you remember what it was called?
He was like 2 years old. So this was a long time ago.
I know, it was a really long time ago. It started with, it was a Helping Hands. I don't remember, but it was done through the hospital and he was identified with a speech. He wasn't speaking at all. And one of the things that I learned there was there was like kind of a game where, you'd throw a ball to another person and then they spoke and then you throw it back, and that taking turns process. And that was one of the things that they were talking about. That wasn't necessarily our child's issue, but other people's children had that issue. And it was that taking turns. And I think that what a lot of people, especially in trucking, especially when you're a sales, when your mindset is towards sales, is that you don't stop talking. And that you don't give the other person an opportunity to actually say anything. You just want to impart your knowledge or your stories or whatever it is. And it might be perfectly pleasant for the listener, but you're not communicating, you are projecting.
Yeah.
And so you have to learn how to stop and actually allow someone else to speak. And there's skill in that. If you're not used to doing that, it's hard to kind of have silence around you.
Yeah. And you really have to be comfortable and confident with yourself in order to just shut the hell up and listen and be quiet for a bit. A lot of people just can't. They're too edgy. Yeah,
you can't. You have to allow for the space. So you have to, like you said, stop talking. And maybe there is a pause and maybe there's empty air there for a while. It reminds me of that song, the Alanis Morissette song,
Why are you so petrified of silence? Yes.
Here, can you handle this? And then
one bar of silence that seems to take forever.
Yeah, but it's a great part of the song because it's silent. And so that's like the first step, is just thinking about and getting comfortable with silence and letting someone else think about their thoughts and what they want to say, because sometimes people need to collect their thoughts. And one of the things that you can do if someone asks you a question and you don't have your answer right away, you're not that quick or you haven't thought about it, is telling people, give me a second. Let me think. I need to think about this for a second. I'm thinking. That communication, just to acknowledge that there is a silence and I know there's silence and I'm sorry about this, but I got to think. I can't answer you right now. There.
Now I have the song in my head.
Oh,
and I have a bar of silence going. But yes, I think that's important. But that's certainly one of the tricks in teaching people how to listen, I think, is giving the specifics of what you should be doing, what's going through your head, rather than just listen better.
Yeah, and I always think of it as, what does it look like? And this is something that you get from teaching children, but it's teaching people. It shouldn't be children or adults. Is what does it look like when you're doing it properly?
And what are the differences? So what does it look like? Yes, it looks like this, but a lot of people can't see the difference between the right and the wrong. And you have to say, these two places, see these two things, these are different. Here it's this, there it's that. And then go through that sequentially, and that will build kind of a template that people can follow when they're doing it properly.
Right. I mean, there's a whole bunch else that goes into it, but just that, if you're going to teach people, then teach people how it looks when you're doing it right, how it looks when there's a problem, and not necessarily how it looks you, like how it looks the other person. So what is that nonverbal behavior that person is exhibiting that may or may not be the fact that you're not getting your message across, or that they're not listening, or they're angry, or they're having some sort of emotion, because that body language can be misinterpreted. And I think body language is a really important part of listening and communication, and being able to interpret people's body language, because body language,
as an educator, it's critical.
Yeah.
You're in front of people, you've got to be paying attention to their body language.
and you make assumptions about people. So the whole eye contact thing, you know, some people hate eye contact and don't want to make, and will listen better, like you, when they're not making eye contact. And
I have gotten crap for that so many times.
You're a perfect example, because you'll be, well, okay, so just an aside to everyone else listening, when Mark is listening, he often drums on the table. So, or on whatever surface he's on, and it makes it look like he's not listening. So to me, you know, some intense drumming, like it can get pretty intense. Like I'm looking at you, you know, playing a song in your head. And I'm thinking, well, you're not listening to me.
And I'm watching you doodling and sketching and filling an entire notebook with anything except actual words. But that's the stuff that people need to do in order to listen.
Yes, I need to draw in order to listen.
Yeah.
And you need to, well, sometimes I can't stand it, but you don't need to look at me.
I'm not so bad with that anymore.
You're not bad.
But I do remember reading about somebody else, and I don't know why this sticks with me, but in the book version of The Big Short, one of the characters in there was on the autism spectrum, and they were talking about...
The main character, right?
No, one of the others. The guy whose character was morphed into a slightly different person, into a made-up name, and was played by Steve Carell in the movie.
Oh.
Real-life version of that guy was also on the spectrum and has a lot of the hallmark communication issues of people on the autism spectrum. And he put it really nicely in a quote in the book. And he said, "If I'm looking at you, that's the one time I'm not paying attention. I can't pay attention and look at you at the same time." So some people, when they're communicating, they just can't make eye contact.
Well, one of our kids has a really good solution for that, which is look at a point on the forehead. So it looks like they're looking at you, but they're really not. Not a point, like not at the top, like sort of in between the eyes, so that you don't have to do that intense eye gaze. But and we've had it where people have their eyes closed and it looks like they're not paying attention.
Oh, I used to have that. That used to really irritate the crap out of me when I was doing speeches and I would see people in the audience. And I remember one of the first speeches I did, there was an audience member that leaned back, had his arms crossed and his eyes closed the whole time. I'm like, man, this dude's sleeping in my presentation. And it drove me crazy. I was like so distracted with him the whole time because why isn't he paying attention? And I would make jokes and I would like kind of raise my voice unexpectedly to see if I could wake him up, and nothing fazed this guy. And it drove me nuts. And then at the end, when the whole thing was finished and the audience went out, it was a break and I was sort of collecting my stuff at the end. He comes up and said, "That was really good." And he starts asking me a bunch of questions about it. And I'm like, oh, damn, he was actually paying attention. It just didn't look like it. It looked like it was something totally different. Yeah,
more and more people are neurodivergent and they listen in different ways.
Yeah.
So you can't really tell whether people are listening or not. And sometimes they can't. What I've learned is that because we do a lot of non-visual talking and listening on Zoom, we do not use cameras on regular meetings. Like sometimes on a special occasion or something, if you're doing a presentation, then we'll turn a camera, like only the speaker turns the camera on. But in general, in our work, we basically just have a phone call. It's all phone. It's all non-visual. So it's only audio. And, we've learned, I think you get kind of a sense of how to do it without visuals. And what I've noticed is that people sometimes can't get everything, it depends on the information, but some information, you're just not going to get it all. Mm-hmm. And you have to do it you have to keep on repeating the same thing over and over again. So if it's a message about how you do your work or processes or whatever, reminders and, remember we do this and remember we do this. those kinds of things are really helpful. I don't think eye contact actually is a deal breaker in those cases.
No. Well, we're not making eye contact because we're not on camera.
Well, even when you're on camera, I find that I tend to not look at everybody. I'm often looking at myself to make sure that I don't look stupid.
So what's interesting, going back to the central bit about listening and how to teach listening and how to be better at it, all of those kind of things, I think we have realized, or I suppose we've learned through practice, how to hear a lot more about what's going on with people just by things like the pace of their conversation, the tone, how they sound. We're listening to the sort of tone quality of their voice. Are they sounding tired? Are they sounding happy? It's a whole different vibe than if you are in front of somebody. And if I was teaching, well, actually, I've had conversations with people about how to listen, how to pick up on what your staff are doing, like how to manage people virtually, which is kind of a tricky thing and similar to, I think, what you were probably getting through with the trainers and trying to manage people and how to listen and what to watch for when you're listening, or what to listen for when you're listening. And there are a lot of things that you don't really think about that much, like the pace of their speech, and are they speaking in a way that's very relaxed or very tense? Are they speaking in a way that's obviously a higher pitched voice than they normally speak? It's really an uncomfortably fake a higher pitched voice or lower pitched voice. All of those things you start to be aware of, and it tells you something about what they're saying or what they think about what you're saying. And we've had people that have spoken with artificially high voices all the time, and it's like, you're not being honest. Or artificially low voices, the famous case being Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos, that always, like, as a petite woman, always had this low booming voice, and it's like, it doesn't add up. And it wasn't a real voice, it was a fake voice.
And it makes, you kind of, her whole persona, I always found it a little bit off-putting because, like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And I find the same thing if I'm having a phone call. I don't do a lot of phone stuff now where I have people sort of cold calling me or calling out of the blue, but I can pick up on a lot of those things when I am talking to somebody, and I watch for it. How comfortable are you? How relaxed? How agitated? What's going on behind the scenes there? And it tells you a lot about the context of the conversation. So
for going back to our original, how do you listen well? And we've talked a lot about how people...
Or how do you teach people to listen
But how
well?
do you teach? So in a nutshell, I think there's a couple of things about listening. And one is to respond, like basically repeat things back to the person. Give them time to speak and basically make sure you understand it. So what I hear you saying is this. And then let the conversation, keep going. Because most of the time when you say, oh, so what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is this, you'll get corrected if you're wrong. And I think if more people said that, it would make communication a lot easier. You wouldn't have those assumptions. If you start with, okay, I think this is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's not judgmental at all.
Yeah.
But if you start responding in an angry way because you've misunderstood the person, then you're just causing an issue. So that reflecting back what the person has just said to you. And also, I think what's important about listening is if you're having a difficult conversation, not beating around the bush. What I've also noticed about people is that they kind of let you, when you're the authority figure, they let you kind of guide the conversation. So if you don't go anywhere, they won't go anywhere. Like they're not going to bring up something unpleasant.
Yep.
They're waiting for you to do it. And you have to be the one to jump into it. And how you frame that unpleasant conversation is basically the tone of the rest of it. So when your superior, frames something a certain way, it's very difficult, I think, for an employee to try and reframe it, but you can. Like you can do the same thing that's being done to you. It's just that I don't think people are taught how to do it.
No.
They're basically reacting with a very emotional response. And you can hear that in people's voices shaking. You can hear that in men and women, doesn't matter, young or old. I've made people's voices shake quite a bit.
Yes.
I'm very aware of the voice shaking, either in nervousness or fury or anxiety and it might not be that I say anything, like I'm not attacking them or anything, but what they're saying is very emotional.
Yep.
And they can't help it. It's, I'm not making them afraid. They just are, it's emotional.
Yeah. Well, that's an important part of teaching people how to listen is explaining to them the importance of being kind of a disconnected observer. Like you're receiving it, but you're not the intended audience. Regardless of what they're saying, you have to separate yourself from it and parse it rather than reacting to it.
Yeah.
You process it rather than reacting to it. And it can be tricky, but you have to think about it as if it's not coming right at you, but you are standing off to the side watching it go past, going towards somebody else, and then you can process it from there, interpret it, filter it, clarify it, whatever from there. But you have to step out of the way so that it's not hitting you directly, and then you can deal with it more easily. So, interesting.
I think it's actually interesting that we're doing this like so close to reviews.
Yes, we're getting all wrapped up and getting prepped to do our semi-annual staff reviews. Yeah, well, it's good timing. We're all ready for it now.
Well, we call them BARs. What do we?
Biannual reviews. Yes, they're not really performance reviews because any performance issues get dealt with at the time, and it tends to be more of an assessment of the status of the position. How is the position working out, and is it what we need, and what needs to change, and what do we need to be doing differently in our processes and things like that. So it's much more of a collaborative review where people step back from their job for a little bit and think about it from distance, and they do kind of what I just said. They step out of the way and look at it from the outside, and we get some really good insights by doing that, and it helps us to really identify blockers or inefficiencies in our process and make them better.
And what's interesting is that we have some standard questions that we always ask at a bar, and it's you basically what went well, what didn't go well, what do you want to change?
Yeah. What do you want to work on over the next 6 months?
Yeah.
And what do we need to do to support you or something like that?
Yeah. Very, very open-ended questions, and it's funny because we've done these for years, and then we got a new HRIS and it had its own questions and they did not work.
Yeah. Those standard HR questions just did not work.
No, it's like if you just ask an open-ended question, okay, so, why are we happy right now? What are you happy with? What things did you work on that you liked? And those open-ended questions, so open-ended is basically where it doesn't matter, like a whole bunch of different answers could be the answer. Mm-hmm. And a closed question is an answer where you basically it's yes or no.
Yeah, fixed list of answers.
Yeah, you know what the answer is going to be, but if you kind of say give an open-ended question, then you have the opportunity to be surprised by the answer. And that's actually very informative because you ask the question and people. So when someone asks me what went well over the last 6 months, I'm thinking about a project or a course or something like that. But sometimes the answer will be, I really liked doing this training session, or I really liked this webinar, or I really liked, teaching someone something. And it's kind of like, oh, you did that. Oh, I forgot. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of get insight about the person and what their character is just from answers to open-ended questions.
Right. Yeah, the things that were the highlights for them that you may not have realized.
Yeah, you have your highlights, but they're not necessarily the other person's highlights.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good experience. It's a lot of work, and while it's happening each time, I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to get to the end of it. But at the end of it, I'm always thinking, yeah, that was really good. We got a lot of really good ideas out of it. We fixed a lot of issues. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, I will say now, because I haven't started them yet. Well,
the what do you want to change is a good one. And I think it depends on, that's one of those open-ended questions where, the platform department is always talking about process changes and technical changes. And then the writers are talking more about, how they get these courses out. And it just can be or they will talk about, oh, I don't like this staff meeting because of this, or I don't want to do this anymore. And after a review, I think this was an anonymous survey, was we don't want cameras on anymore for Zoom meetings. We tried Zoom meetings with cameras on for a
early
month.
in COVID.
Yeah, because everybody else was doing it, and we thought, maybe we should do it. So we tried it, and it was no.
Yeah, it did not work.
No.
So, yeah, we learned a lot of good stuff. So that kind of brings me around to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, a new course that's just about to be released, leadership, or the second course in our series of leadership courses. And it's just been called leadership internally. And it occurs to me that I don't know what the actual name or subject is, but you've made a few comments about it being really well done, and it's a really nice looking course, and the content's really good. So tell me more about it. What is this course actually about? What's it called? And what do you like about it?
It's called Leadership Styles.
Oh, Leadership Styles. Yes. Okay.
So there are
all the different styles of the manager in the middle, a manager at the top, and manager on the outside, that kind of thing. Yeah, sorry.
Yes. I didn't finish listening to you. But
so let me explain how to listen.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other thing, the whole mansplaining thing. So Leadership Styles is, so if you look at our emotional intelligence course, Leadership Styles has actually, it's like moving one step further from emotional intelligence and kind of talks about the styles of leadership that you use in different situations. So there's about 6 different leadership styles, and I'm not even going to get into them because there's tons of names for
There's a course where you can learn them all.
Well, it's not just that, but there's tons of different names for everything, right?
Right.
There's also, you look at different behavioral, those tests like Myers-Briggs and DISC and all of that stuff. It's kind of like that with leadership styles too. It's, there's all these different terms based on whatever book you got. But there's 6 of them. And the idea is that you don't choose one leadership style. You actually should move between leadership styles depending on what is happening within your team.
Interesting.
Yeah. So one of them is democratic, where you're asking everybody for input and basically everybody decides how you're going to move forward. But then there's another leadership style, which is, I can't remember, commanding, which is you've already decided what needs to happen. And this usually happens in the case of an emergency or there's an issue. And you basically say, you do this, you do this, you do this. This is what we're doing. Here's how it's going to happen. Here are your rules. Go. But you don't want to use that leadership style all the time, but you don't want to use a democratic style all the time either, because in the case of a crisis, you don't want to be like, okay.
You don't always have time for that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not very efficient. So there's a whole bunch of other ones. And it's basically when you should use one or the other and when's it most effective, which ones, how you might feel comfortable in one or not in another, but here's how to do it, that kind of thing. The reason that I really like the course is because it does relate very nicely to emotional intelligence and also the use of color. And this may be completely, lost on a bunch of people, but we're using color a lot in emotional intelligence, and that use of color translates into leadership styles. And, so as the characters are assuming one leadership style over another, their clothes change color.
Oh, interesting.
So you might have, I can't remember.
So is it the same characters with different outfits?
The same outfit, different color.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we were playing around with color quite a bit, and I think it looks really nice. You can really tell, when you move from green to black to orange, there are definitely different things are happening, and there's a lot of scenarios. So there's a lot of examples of in real life what this would look like.
Okay.
And I also played around with a little bit of artificial intelligence while I was...
is that the one where you did the voice?
Well, I did the voice, and I also adjusted some photos. It's really interesting because Adobe Photoshop has some generative AI in there. And so you can actually create images just by typing in a prompt, which is when it creates a person out from scratch, they're very weird looking.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is I'm adjusting backgrounds, and like if I want an entire person and their head's cut off, I can generate the top of their head, their hair.
Okay.
And it's really good for that. It's really good for changing the background from a living room to an office.
Oh, okay.
It's really good for that. You may not like the type of, like what it does, but you just give it more details and it will.
Right.
So I did try saying, put a jungle as the background, and it gave me potted plants. Like it's weird that way.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite do what you think it's going to do. And I was trying to remove someone from a couch. So I really liked the picture of the person, but I didn't want his pregnant wife on the couch next to him because it doesn't work for a leadership course.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get Photoshop to remove this woman from the couch and replace it with something else. And I just kept getting different pregnant women. It was weird.
Swapping out the pregnant women.
Yeah, add couch, more pregnant women. And then and they're really creepy looking too. It was not a good pregnant woman. So I can't remember what I typed, but I typed a phrase, and it finally gave me couch cushions or something like that.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So what I also did was, for some voiceover that I didn't like, I got some AI generated voice. Again, I don't think it's great, but it's better than what I wouldn't do an entire course with artificial intelligence. I wouldn't do that.
No, those fake voices, they sound weird. They're so uncanny valley.
Yeah. And I used it very, very sparsely. I've done 3 lines, and I needed a conversation. And the conversation person that I had, who only had these couple of lines, was too young sounding. And so I needed to have her older. So I basically looked that up. But there's you can find a zillion different voices. But it's like finding an actual human voiceover person.
Yeah.
You have to listen to endless samples of the people talking, and you're like, no.
And that's after adding in a whole pile of tags to narrow it down.
No, what they do, well, I think if I bought a service, then it would be easier. But I was because it was such a little amount, I was trying to do it for free. And so I was just experimenting. And what I found was they just give you names. It's like Siri. Well, not Siri, but the Mac used to have a whole bunch of different names. Macintalk, yeah. But you can still find those people and their voices on just any Mac. And, it wasn't like Siri. It's like Annabelle and Maggie and David and Jonathan. And remember, one would sound almost human, and another one would sound like a robot, and another one sounds like, whatever. But you would have to go and listen to every single one to actually figure out what you wanted. It was kind of that.
Yep.
I had a list of names, and I'm trying to, all I can tell from the name is, are you male or are you female? Mm-hmm. And there was one who talked like this. Okay, that's not good.
So you found something? I
did. I found a 30-something woman with a relatively low voice. So yeah, she sounded fine.
Now we're going to have to find the same thing for French and Spanish.
Yeah, but most AI voices you can do in French and Spanish. I'm not that concerned about that. I just really didn't want that. I wasn't happy with what we had. But so yeah, those are my 2 content generating AI experiments. And I have to say, it's very useful, but I would not try and do an entire project, an entire course, do all the art, all of that. No.
Well, that's kind of lining up with how we're seeing it on the platform side as well, is that it's useful as a shortcut in a very few specific places. So you've got something like, the voiceover thing. Yeah, you could have gone and found somebody that was that kind of voice and get them to record that bit, and it would have sounded a little bit better than what you got, but the amount of time you would have put into it would have been way more than what you did here.
Yep.
Same thing with this photo. You could have removed that background yourself, found another background, put it in there, removed the pregnant wife, put something else in there. you could have, either yourself or one of your designers change the guy's outfit if you want. You can do all of those things, but the AI experiment gets you there way quicker. And it's stuff that you can do, but you're going to be putting 6 hours into it instead of 20 minutes or half an hour or whatever it was. And it's the same thing that we see with AI tools that are code supplements. And so we've had one that we've been using for about 6 months, I think now, maybe longer, maybe since last summer. So I guess
is that Copilot?
Yeah, Copilot that we've been using, which is fairly mature as these tools go, but it's useful for some things. It's not going to write a lot of code for you, but if you give it very specific parameters, it will finish things for you more quickly than you would be able to. So it is, people say, oh yeah, AI is just autocomplete on steroids. And well, kind of is, but it's a little bit smarter than that, and it's a little bit faster, and it's a little bit more thorough. And in particular for unit tests, where you have to write a series of tests that very clearly test whether a particular function works as designed. Those things are tedious. Developers hate doing them, but you have to do them all the time. So it's really good for that. So you can write your functions and then say, give me unit tests for this, and it will do it. It will go and build those tests for you, and they'll be pretty decent tests, and it will get them done pretty fast. So much like what you're doing, it's all stuff you could do yourself, but it's much quicker if the tool does it for you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I still would not trust any code that was entirely written by AI any more than an entirely AI-generated image or content. I mean, we keep seeing people that are using AI for generated content, and it's just flat out wrong because the AI is just, it's either so vague and general that it's useless, or it's specific and just flat out wrong.
Well, the problem, I think, is that, and I read this somewhere, where did I read it, is that the way that AI has been trained, and most of the AIs that people are using are from, Alphabet or Microsoft or whatever. Those, let's say they're libraries, they were trained on the internet.
Yeah.
So they are not necessarily true.
Yeah.
And getting the AI to actually discern what is true, what is not, that's a whole different process. You basically have to train them on what's true and not. And the other problem is...
You have to teach them how to listen.
Then you get to the problem where, truthiness, as Stephen Colbert used to say, what is the truth? And so now you're getting, I don't know, was it Bing? It was telling people to eat something?
I think it was... Bing they were having some problems with it a while ago in earlier generations. I think it was, there was one recently. I think it was Google's AI chat that was giving people really bad advice.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue, is that people are not going to trust AI until they stop doing that. And the issue is that basically they've flung AI out into the world, and it's kind of half-baked.
Yeah. And the complex challenge now is that since the world is aware of it, you have all of these people who create content that have said, I don't want my stuff being used to train AI. So the language models get trained on the data that's available to them, that's available publicly, or that is produced by people who don't care enough to assert ownership and prohibit that use of it. So you're not really getting good data to work from. So it's going to be trickier. That's going to be the next hurdle for them, is to try and figure out how to get good data to train their models.
Yeah, if nobody wants to, well, you're basically using people. You're using people and profiting off of them. Which
is what has happened for time immemorial. Is you've learned things by reading the books written by others. You learn to write by reading other people and all of that other stuff. And it's all fine at the scale of a human or scale of an individual.
Yeah.
Everything is fine until it scales.
Yep.
What's becoming my new motto because it applies in so many places. Everything is fine until you scale it up exponentially. And then everybody is like, hold on a second. That's not really what we meant. I'm okay with you doing it, but not a computer that is 100 million times more powerful than you.
Well, also, that whole training AI and you're feeding it all this information, what it spits out is not... When a human reads a book, that human interprets the book and might use some specific words or a concept or whatever from that book, but they don't regurgitate the book.
But it's also conditioned by all of their other life experiences.
Exactly.
That go into filtering what they read and creating something new.
And with AI,
that has no life experience.
So it's just regurgitating, and it basically regurgitates things that are very close to the same, like the identical thing. And AI doesn't say, oh, I got this from here.
Yeah.
It doesn't do what every academic is, or what every child is taught to do, is say, who are your sources? Where are you getting this information?
Yeah, it doesn't say, this book says this, but this book also says this. So let's put these two together and come up with this other thing.
Yeah, it just slams everything together and says, here you go. Here's the information that you asked for, because you're paying extra in whatever application that you've bought to get an AI enabled whatever. And yeah, it kind of annoys me because these huge tech companies kind of assume that they have the right to go and scrape everything and then just regurgitate it without saying, yeah, this came from somewhere else.
Because it wasn't expressly prohibited.
Yeah.
Except that now it is becoming expressly prohibited.
Yeah.
They're getting more and more boxed into.
Which is good. I don't think that's right. I mean, as a person who creates a lot of content, I don't think it's right to have some friggin' computer just, vacuum it up along with everything else, and you lose a lot.
It can be quite enraging.
Can be.
Which brings me to the last thing that I wanted to talk about.
Road rage?
Yes, the last thing that is on our list for new courses that are coming soon that I'm also excited about.
Rage of the road.
Rage of the road. Yes. Now we had covered this a little bit in our defensive driving courses. We had some bits about it, and what to do about it, and how to recognize it, and all of that sort of stuff. But now we've got a dedicated course on the subject, and this I find interesting because I wouldn't have thought there was a course there. Like, I wouldn't have thought there was that much to the subject unless you start getting into a lot of the sociological things or psychological things underpinning it. But you obviously have found enough for a course in there. So what's this one all about? Well,
I didn't find enough, of course. One of our writers.
The grander you.
The content you.
The content underneath you, yes.
Rhiannon, who's one of our writers, did this course. And Berenice, who's our lead creative, did the graphics, which are quite good. I really like the graphics because we have some people, but we also have some characters, like not a cartoon, but like an illustrated character as well. So it works really well in the course. But it's really about what it is. So what road rage is and how you can express it, because you can express it in a number of different ways. You can express it physically using your vehicle or verbally. So, and it's not just about other people's road rage, it's about yours as well. So what are the things that make you feel road rage? What does it look like? Triggers, and how do you stop these triggers? Like, how do you stop from, or how do you change from having road rage and expressing road rage to not expressing it? And what do you do? And what does that look like? So before, like in defensive driving, in our defensive driving courses, we do talk about road rage. We talk about, but it's really kind of basic. It's like, avoid the person, don't engage. And if you are feeling angry, try to calm down, or, do these things, strategies to calm down. But this course goes into more detail. It's not a long course. I think it's going to be like maybe 40 minutes tops. But I think what it also does is, instead of putting it in the general category of defensive driving, it focuses attention on road rage specifically, so that if people are having issues with that specific thing, it's not, wrapped in just like general defensive driving, that you're really focusing on the issue. And then another part of the course, which is good, is what to do, like different strategies, and then different strategies to handle other people.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And both of these are nearing completion state. Yes.
Leadership voice is being done. Yeah, I think it's going to be going out in the next month or so.
Mm-hmm.
And Road Rage too. I think Road Rage is still getting some audio done, but I think it's not very, it's not a long course. So I can see the audio coming in from our real life voiceover guy.
Right.
So that will be coming soon. And then further down the line, we have owner-operator business skills.
Which will be later in the summer.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the long-awaited, completely overhauled business skills for owner-operators.
Yes.
Or how to not lose money when you own a truck.
Well, we can't prevent you from losing money, but
how to set yourself up with the best chance for success.
Yeah, how to not be surprised by things, and how to, make sure that you've planned, and you're not going to get taken advantage of. Things like that.
Does it tell people to stay out of the spot market?
It does not. I don't want to say, I'm not going to say anything.
If somebody wants to make that work, they can.
Lots of people
have done it very well.
Yeah. I don't, as far as the strategy, that's not the purview of the course.
Okay. Understanding the business fundamentals so that you can make an informed decision about whether or not you want to get into the spot market.
Yes. And it does include things like budgeting and figuring out what your revenue is going to be. So that's something to think about in the framework of the spot market versus trying to find consistent customers, where you may have to start out in the spot market because that's what you've got. That's what's available. And then move towards building relationships with customers that will give you repeat business, which is may not be as profitable as the spot market can be, but it is much more reliable. And you have, so I am assuming that for, someone who's wanting to be an owner operator, you're going to start off with primarily relying on a carrier and then kind of moving into the spot market, like half and half, and, kind of find a happy medium. That's how I would do it.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing these courses out. And I think with that, we can bring this episode to a close.
And this is it for the summer.
Yes. Thank you all for listening to another season of the Carrier's Edge podcast, a.k.a. Dan and Mark's Ramblings. And we'll see you in the fall with some new stuff. And in the meantime, have a great summer, everybody.
Yes, have a good one.